Evan Myers sat at his desk, surrounded by the disarray of old research papers, half-finished experiments, and a growing pile of empty coffee cups. His office, nestled in a corner of the university's physics department, was a chaotic reflection of his mind, unruly, cluttered, and always buzzing with 1,000 theories. It had been days since he last slept properly, but he didn't care. Today, he was onto something. Something big. A string of numbers blinked on his computer screen, accompanied by the sound of tapping keys. Evan squinted at the code, eyes wide behind his thick glasses. There was something there, something unmistakable. A pattern. An encrypted transmission. A message. He leaned in closer, his fingers trembling with excitement. For years, Evan had been obsessed with antimatter, the holy grail of physics. It was a concept that was as elusive as it was powerful. But now, as if the universe was finally acknowledging his relentless pursuit, an alien signal had made its way to him. "Got you," he muttered, a grin spreading across his face. The transmission wasn't random. It was deliberate. And it wasn't from Earth. In an instant, Evan's mind was racing. How could this be possible? The encryption was sophisticated, far beyond anything humans had developed. Yet, someone, or something, had sent it to him. The message spoke of antimatter, but not the usual theoretical nonsense. This was different. It spoke of its origins. And not just from some distant corner of the universe. The transmission described a planet, a place where antimatter was not just theoretical, it was real. And someone had figured out how to use it. He needed to know more. Without hesitation, Evan bolted from his chair, startling a few colleagues who were passing by his door. He didn't notice them. He was too deep in thought. His fingers flew over his phone screen, searching for the name of his former mentor, Professor Robert Harris, a man whose expertise in deep space communication would help him make sense of the data. Within seconds, his mentor's number rang. "Evan?" Harris's voice crackled through the phone, thick with curiosity. "What is it this time? Another one of your wild theories?" "This isn't a theory, Robert. This is real," Evan said, his voice low but charged with excitement. "I've found it. The source of antimatter. It's coming from an alien civilization." There was a brief silence on the other end. Evan could hear the shuffle of papers and the hum of a nearby machine as Harris processed the information. Finally, the professor spoke again, his voice now tinged with skepticism. "All right. Show me. But this better not be another one of your eccentric ideas." Evan barely registered the sarcasm. He was already on the move, packing up his things, grabbing his coat, and rushing out the door. He wasn't sure how he knew this, but in his gut, Evan was certain, this was the breakthrough he'd been waiting for. The next morning, Evan stood in front of a large screen in a conference room, surrounded by a team of scientists, engineers, and a professional astronaut, Sophia Clark. She was the no-nonsense type, with short dark hair and an air of authority that made her seem far older than her years. Evan had worked with her before, though, to be honest, most of his colleagues thought she was far too serious for the work they were about to embark on. Sophia crossed her arms, eyeing Evan as he typed furiously at the controls, the large screen in front of them flickering with symbols and alien script. "I'm still not convinced," Sophia said, her voice measured but with an edge of disbelief. "You think this is going to work?" Evan paused, glancing up at her. "I know it's going to work. The message isn't just some alien nonsense. It's real. It's a map. And we're going to follow it. This could be everything we've ever dreamed of." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we take a spaceship, our spaceship, and go to some distant planet that you've never even visited, based on a signal from an alien race that you can barely decode?" Evan's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Exactly. Think about it, Sophia. The source of antimatter. A civilization that's already perfected its use. We could learn more in one trip than we have in centuries of research. Imagine the possibilities. Energy. space travel. You name it. Sophia looked at the rest of the team. Some were nodding, but most of them wore expressions of skepticism. But the numbers didn't lie, and Evan had already convinced them that the coordinates were real. "All right," she said, sighing. "You've got your mission. But if this goes sideways, I'm blaming you." Evan smiled broadly, unperturbed by the risks. "Deal. But when we come back, you'll be thanking me." The crew of the Odyssey, a small, state-of-the-art ship designed for deep space exploration, was ready to leave within the week. Evan had the coordinates, the alien map now partially decoded, and a crew of brilliant, if skeptical, minds willing to follow him into the unknown. As they prepared for launch, Evan couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. This was the kind of adventure he had dreamed of since he was a kid, staring up at the stars. He was about to step into the unknown, to chase down the answers to the biggest questions of the universe. The scientists and engineers had their doubts, but none of them could hide the spark of curiosity in their eyes. After all, no one had ever found antimatter in this form before. No one had ever even come close. Sophia, though, had one final warning as they suited up in their space gear. "You keep saying this is real," she said, voice softening just slightly. "But remember, we're going into the unknown. It's not just about discovery. It's about survival." Evan looked her in the eyes, his confidence unwavering. "We'll survive. We're not just chasing some alien fairy tale, Sophia. We're chasing the future." Days later, as the Odyssey launched from Earth's orbit, the hum of the engines echoed through the ship's halls. The stars stretched before them, endless and unyielding. In the quiet hum of the ship, Evan's mind raced. The message had promised much, too much, perhaps. But this was real. He knew it. They were on their way to a world that had mastered antimatter, to a civilization that had unlocked its power and lived to tell the tale. Or so he hoped. The journey was long, and the silence between Evan and the rest of the crew was almost unbearable. They had their tasks to do, calibrating instruments, preparing for the unknown, and trying to decipher the rest of the alien transmission. But Evan kept his focus, staring out at the infinite expanse of space. Then, after weeks of travel, the Odyssey finally entered the outer orbit of the alien planet Zyphora. It was a world unlike any Evan had imagined. Its skies shimmered with unnatural auroras, and its surface was dotted with glowing structures, like nothing Earth had ever seen. The planet appeared desolate, its cities abandoned. But something in the air seemed to call to them. Something hidden, something ancient. Evan stood at the observation window, breath catching in his throat. This was it. They had arrived. A sudden knock on the door broke his trance. Sophia's voice came through the intercom. "We're approaching the surface. You ready?" Evan turned, his heart pounding. Absolutely. As the Odyssey descended through the atmosphere of Zyphora, the reality of their mission settled in. They weren't just explorers anymore. They were about to meet the aliens who had solved the greatest energy problem in history, and, perhaps, the aliens were about to find something even more dangerous in return. As the Odyssey descended through the swirling clouds of Zyphora, Evan's heart raced. Outside the observation window, the alien world stretched out before them in a mesmerizing cascade of lights and colors, too beautiful to be real. The surface of the planet shimmered with an eerie glow, as if the very land itself was alive, pulsing with energy. The ship's hull groaned as they pushed through the atmosphere, the quiet hum of the engines barely audible over the rush of adrenaline that filled Evan's veins. Sophia's voice crackled through the intercom again, more urgent this time. "We're entering the landing zone. Prepare for touchdown." Evan's fingers tightened on the armrest, his breath quickening as they neared the surface. He glanced over at the rest of the crew. Each of them, like him, was both excited and uneasy. No one knew exactly what they would find on Zyphora, but they had come too far to turn back now. "Focus," Sophia continued. "Get ready for anything." The ship jolted slightly as it made contact with the ground, sending a tremor through the crew. Evan couldn't stop himself from looking out the window again. The landscape of Zyphora seemed to ripple with an otherworldly energy, as though it were alive, responding to their arrival. Massive structures loomed in the distance, high, sleek towers that seemed to grow directly from the planet's surface, their surfaces glowing faintly with bioluminescent patterns. The landing gear hissed as it settled into place. Outside, the planet was quiet, save for the distant hum of energy coursing through the landscape. There were no signs of life, no bustling crowds or cities filled with alien creatures. Just eerie, magnificent silence. The crew moved quickly, donning their helmets and securing their gear. Sophia was the first to step out of the ship, her boots crunching softly on the alien terrain as she surveyed the surroundings. Evan followed closely, the chill of the air biting at his face as he stepped onto the surface of Zyphora. He felt something stir deep within him. It wasn't just the thrill of discovery, it was something else. A sense of awe, yes, but also an underlying unease. Something about this planet felt wrong. Not dangerous, necessarily, but something in the way the air hummed, the way the ground seemed to pulse beneath their feet, sent a shiver down his spine. "Stay close," Sophia's voice broke through his thoughts. She had already begun scanning the area with her equipment, her eyes narrowing as she studied the surroundings. Evan snapped out of his reverie and looked around. There were strange plant-like structures growing from the ground, their tendrils curling toward the sky, glowing with an eerie blue light. The air smelled faintly of something sweet, almost sickly sweet, like the scent of a flower that was too perfect, too controlled. "We should find the source of the signal," Evan said, his voice a little too eager, even for him. "The transmission came from somewhere here. It's not just random." Sophia nodded, her gaze shifting toward a distant structure, a massive building that loomed in the horizon, taller than any skyscraper Evan had ever seen. It was unlike anything humans had built. Sleek, metallic, with sharp angles and curves that seemed to defy conventional engineering. And it was glowing. The light coming from it pulsed in rhythmic waves, like a heartbeat. "Let's move," Sophia said, already taking the lead. "And keep your wits about you. We don't know what we're dealing with here." The crew followed her, their steps quiet in the stillness of the alien world. Every movement felt amplified, as if the planet itself were watching them. The closer they got to the glowing structure, the more intense the feeling became, but Evan couldn't shake the sense that they were being drawn toward it, like moths to a flame. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting something to emerge from the shadows, but the landscape remained eerily empty. The structure towered over them now, casting a long shadow over the ground as they approached. Its surface was smooth, like polished metal, but also somehow organic, alive. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, shimmering with the same bioluminescent glow. Evan reached out to touch the surface, but before his fingers made contact, a deep hum reverberated through the ground, and the structure seemed to come to life. "Hold on," Sophia said sharply, stepping back. "We're not alone." Evan's pulse quickened. He didn't have time to react before a door, if you could even call it that, opened in the side of the structure, revealing a dimly lit interior. The space beyond was vast, the ceiling impossibly high. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and in the center of the room, a glowing core hummed softly, its light brighter than anything Evan had seen before. And then, they appeared, tall, slender beings with translucent skin that glowed faintly in the dim light. Their eyes were large and dark, pools of blackness that seemed to pierce through him. They had no visible mouths, but when they spoke, their voices echoed inside Evan's mind, clear and calm. "You have come," one of them said, its voice like a song, its presence overwhelming. Evan took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what to say. He had expected something, but not this. These creatures were nothing like the humans he'd known, or any alien he had imagined. They were serene, their movements graceful and deliberate, as if everything they did was part of some larger design. They didn't seem dangerous, but the power radiating from them was palpable. "We've come to learn," Evan said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. We decoded a transmission. A signal. We believe it's from your civilization." The creature before him tilted its head slightly, its dark eyes never leaving him. "You seek the source of antimatter," it said, as though it already knew. Evan's breath caught in his throat. "Yes," he said, barely able to form the words. "We've been studying it. For years. But we can't fully understand its potential. We need to know how you've mastered it." The alien's gaze shifted toward the glowing core in the center of the room, then back to Evan. "Antimatter," it said, its voice carrying a weight of centuries, "was never meant to be understood. It was meant to be used. But we have come to understand that which we should never have tried to control." A chill ran down Evan's spine as the words settled into him. Something about them felt like a warning. "What do you mean?" he asked, his curiosity growing despite the unease that had begun to settle in his chest. "The path we took," the alien continued, "led us to a great discovery, but at a cost. Our civilization is crumbling. The antimatter we harnessed is no longer enough. We are dying. And we fear you will make the same mistakes we did." Evan stared at the creature, his mind reeling. The weight of its words struck him harder than any equation he had ever solved. They weren't just offering knowledge, they were offering a warning. A glimpse into a future that might await humanity if they, too, pushed the boundaries of science too far. "But," Evan's voice faltered. "How did you survive so long? You must have found a way to contain it." "We did," the alien replied, its voice heavy with regret. "But all things come to an end. Our resources are depleting. The antimatter we have used to sustain us is running out. The very fabric of our world is unraveling. We can no longer sustain the power we once had." Evan felt a pit form in his stomach. The weight of what the alien was saying was impossible to ignore. They had solved antimatter, mastered it, and yet it had led them to this, an unstoppable decline. "Is there nothing we can do?" Evan asked, almost whispering, as if speaking too loudly might make the truth more unbearable. The alien's eyes softened, and a ripple of sorrow passed through its gaze. "You must find another way. The power you seek must not be taken without understanding the consequences. Your species may yet have a chance, but only if you learn from our mistakes." Sophia, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward, her voice cutting through the stillness. "You're saying we should abandon the search for antimatter?" The alien looked at her, its gaze unreadable. "Not abandon it," it said. "Learn from it. Use it wisely. Or face the same end." The room grew silent, the hum of the core the only sound filling the air. Evan was left staring at the alien, the enormity of its words sinking deep into him. They had found the source of antimatter, but it came with a price. The truth, as always, was far more complicated than he had ever imagined, and as the door behind them began to close, Evan knew that the true discovery had just begun. The door closed behind them with a soft hiss, leaving the crew standing in the dim light of the alien structure. Evan felt a sense of vertigo, as if the ground beneath him had shifted, and the weight of the conversation they had just had was pressing down on him like a physical force. The words of the Altherian still rang in his mind: "Learn from our mistakes. Use it wisely. Or face the same end." The air felt heavier now, more oppressive, as though the planet itself were watching them. He could hear Sophia's steady breathing beside him, the slight rustle of her suit as she shifted on her feet. The others were silent, each processing what they had just heard in their own way. The hum of the core still resonated through the room, but it no longer sounded like a beacon of discovery. It now felt like a countdown. Evan's mind raced. How could they learn from the Altherian's mistakes? He had always seen antimatter as the key to limitless energy, the solution to humanity's energy crisis. But now, faced with the reality that mastering such power could bring a civilization to its knees, Evan was unsure. He had crossed a line. The questions that had driven his life for years now felt dangerously naive. Could humanity handle it? Could anyone handle it? Sophia broke the silence, her voice cutting through the tension. What now, Evan? He blinked, shaking himself out of his thoughts. The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. He had come here seeking answers, but the answers were not what he had expected. We need to understand more, Evan said, his voice wavering only slightly. The Altherians aren't wrong. The power of antimatter, it's far more dangerous than we realized. We need to study their containment systems. Understand how they were able to harness it for so long without destroying themselves. But we also need to find out why their resources are depleting. We could learn everything they know, but how do we even begin to understand their technology? Sophia asked, her brow furrowed. Evan looked at her, the question hanging in the air between them. The technology they were dealing with was so far beyond anything humanity had achieved, it felt almost like a dream. But then again, they had decoded the signal and found this place. They had done the impossible before. He had no choice but to push forward. We'll start by studying their infrastructure, Evan said, more confidently now. Their reactors, their energy sources. They've got answers, and we'll find them. Sophia nodded, but Evan could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't trust the aliens, and he couldn't blame her. These beings had warned them, but they had also extended an olive branch, giving them the chance to learn and to grow. There was so much to take in, so much to process. They spent the next few hours traversing the strange, labyrinthine halls of the structure. The Altherians had shown them to a large chamber that housed their main reactor, a massive orb of pulsing light and energy at the center of the room. The walls were adorned with alien symbols, intricate and beautiful in their complexity. Evan approached the reactor carefully, his heart racing. The room buzzed with energy, and the air around the core seemed to shimmer, as though the very space was alive. This was it, the heart of the Altherian power. But as he stepped closer, the reality of the situation hit him. The Altherians had built this. They had made this thing to fuel their civilization, but now it was failing. The signs were there, flickering lights, the subtle tremors in the air, the faint crackling sounds from the core. Something was wrong. The energy that had once sustained them was running dry. This is it, Evan whispered, almost to himself. This is where it all falls apart. Sophia stepped up beside him, studying the reactor with a calculating eye. We need to figure out what went wrong. If we can understand why this is failing, maybe we can find a solution. The team spread out, each member scanning different parts of the room, collecting data, and examining the alien technology. Evan felt his mind working overtime, piecing together fragments of information from the Altherians' warnings and the vast amounts of data they were collecting. But as much as he tried, something was missing. What's this? One of the engineers, Martin, called out from across the room. Evan rushed over to him, heart pounding. Martin was standing by a large console embedded in the wall, his fingers hovering over a series of alien buttons and switches. There was a panel next to him, its surface cracked and darkened as if it had been damaged. But the most interesting part was the display, an empty graph, a line fluctuating sporadically, but with a clear downward trend. This looks like an energy consumption graph, Martin said, frowning. But it's showing a decrease, a sharp one. The system is using less and less energy. Something's pulling it all away. Evan's eyes widened as the implications hit him. This is the depletion they were talking about, he said, his voice quiet with realization. Their entire energy network is failing. But why? Sophia, having noticed the same display, was already moving closer. It's not just a malfunction, is it? It's something systemic. Evan shook his head, a sense of dread creeping into him. This reactor is connected to the planet's core somehow. If it's drawing energy from it, and that core is running out of power, the planet itself is dying, Sophia finished, her tone grim. Evan's heart sank. The Altherians hadn't just been facing a crisis, they had been living with it for centuries, unaware that their very way of life was unsustainable. And now, Evan realized, they were trapped. The antimatter they had so carefully perfected had become both their blessing and their curse. It was what had powered their civilization, but it had also drained the planet of its resources. And now it was too late to stop the inevitable. We need to get to the core, Evan said, his mind racing. If we can stabilize the flow of energy, maybe we can help them. Sophia looked at him, her face a mixture of disbelief and determination. You really think we can fix it? We don't even know how their systems work. We'll figure it out, Evan said, trying to sound confident. If we can stop the drain on their core, we might have a chance to prevent the collapse. They moved quickly, following the directions the Altherians had given them, descending deeper into the structure. The corridors grew darker as they went, the hum of the core fading in the distance. It was an eerie, oppressive silence, and Evan could feel his nerves begin to fray. This wasn't just a scientific expedition anymore. This was a race against time. Finally, they reached the center of the facility, a vast chamber that stretched impossibly high. In the center, a massive energy conduit ran from the reactor to the planet's core. It was like a gigantic vein, pulsating with energy, but the flow was irregular. The energy was slipping through the cracks, like water escaping from a leaking dam. Evan approached the conduit, his breath shallow. This is it, he murmured. We need to stabilize the flow. Sophia joined him, her gaze scanning the controls in front of them. There's no manual. No instructions. Evan nodded, his mind clicking into overdrive. We have to make this work. The Altherians have spent centuries on this. If we don't fix it now, they're done for. He reached forward, hands trembling slightly, and began to adjust the controls. Nothing happened at first. Then, slowly, the lights flickered, the hum of the core deepened, and the flow of energy began to stabilize. For a moment, everything seemed to hold. The tension that had gripped Evan's chest loosened, and he allowed himself a small breath of relief. But then, just as quickly, the system began to sputter again, the energy flow cutting off in violent spurts. No! Evan shouted, slamming his hand on the console. We need more time. It's not enough. Sophia's eyes narrowed. We don't have time. This place is falling apart. Evan's gaze flickered back to the core, his mind flashing through 100 possibilities. Then, it hit him. The reactor wasn't just draining power, it was causing a feedback loop, destabilizing the planet's core faster than they could contain it. We're too late, Evan whispered, the reality sinking in. The Altherians are right. The energy is already gone. This planet is beyond saving. As the final realization hit him, he knew their mission had changed. They had come to learn, to unlock the secrets of antimatter, but they were leaving with something far more profound, a warning. The cycle that the Altherians had begun so long ago was now playing out in front of them, and humanity had to face a truth they hadn't wanted to acknowledge. It was never just about power. It was about responsibility, and Evan understood, with painful clarity, that their work wasn't done. It had only just begun.